To my surprise, there was a car outside waiting for us, and he carefully sat me down in the passenger seat. He smoothed his hands gently over my hair, and then leaned his forehead against mine. "Next time, Brittany, next time you call me the moment you realize they are vampires." It was not a question, but a demand. I felt too faint to protest, though, so I nodded. "Can we leave now? I really want to shower and curl up in bed. I want to forget." My voice sounded tiny as I spoke, and it was very hard to hide the hurt inside. My father had just tried to sell me to a bunch of crazy vampires, all for some lousy deal, which I was sure was off now, no matter that the man had been a stranger to me, even though I'd lived with him for 3 years. I was still his flesh and blood, and it hurt that he would do that. Because he was my father and I wanted him to love me. Alexander was right, though. They didn't deserve it. Not one bit. Not my concern, and not my love, and not my attention. They certainly didn't deserve to have Andy. What would happen to my little brother now that I'd left? There was no way my father was going to allow me back in the house, and I was pretty sure I didn't want that either. To be under the same roof with people that had betrayed me, Alexander climbed into the driver's seat and started driving, his eyes more on me than on the road, but I wasn't scared we would crash. Not him. What I'd seen tonight, the sheer power, that presence, I didn't know what he was anymore, but I was sure he wasn't just an ordinary vampire. No way in hell was that possible. His name alone had struck so much fear inside Luke that he passed out. I was pretty sure that vampires didn't just pass out. Not easily, at least. We were almost home when I realized Luke was going to be executed. By who or what, I didn't know, but there was no doubt in my mind that it was going to happen if I didn't put a stop to it. I didn't want to be responsible for someone's death. "Alexander?" I asked, and I hated how I sounded so weak. It wasn't going to help Luke's fate if I was. Alexander wouldn't believe me if I tried to convince him it wasn't as bad as it looked, and he didn't deserve to die if I sounded like that. "A gramo kroi?" he asked softly, but there was still the sense of a steel blade covered with silk. He was very angry, not at me, but at the Miller family and my father. "Is Luke really going to die?" It was quiet a moment, and then his features softened. "I forget, Britt. You are human and very innocent. Yes, he is going to die. It is our law, and if we do not uphold it, vampires all over the territory will see it as a weakness and run rampant, indulging themselves in their sickest desires. He broke the law, a sacred law. For that he dies." I swallowed. "I don't want him to die. He's just a kid." It scared me a little how utterly ruthless Alexander sounded. It didn't seem to bother him in the least that a living being, or well undead being, was going to be sniffed out, destroyed. Yes, he is a kid, but he is also 120 years old, a grarmo kroyi. He had a longer life than most will ever have, and still he learned no respect. Do not pity a creature like him. He was weak. The gravel crunched as we stopped in the drive in front of the house. Alexander was out of the car and at my door in the blink of an eye, opening it and picking me up gently to carry me inside. I protested, "I can walk. I no longer feel faint," which was true, although I felt battered and dirty. My voice had gained in strength too. "Humor me, a gramokoi." He no longer seemed angry, but he was still intent, and his bones were sharply defined against the flawless skin on his face. Those stormy gray eyes, dark, but even though I knew that indicated either hunger, anger, or lust, all of which would trigger the fangs, I saw no glimpse of them as he talked. I wondered at the control that meant he had. None of the Millers had been able to stop themselves when blood had been spilled. The house was dark when we entered, and I guessed everyone else was out. Alexander strode up the stairs and straight to his own room at the end without pause. Despite what had happened tonight, that still gave me a nervous shiver. The way he just assumed I'd be sleeping in his room with him. He sat me down on the edge of the bed and then stood back, folding his arms across his chest. He was looking down at me with this stern look on his face that told me he wasn't pleased at all. At his look, I took off my coat, and at his gasp, I frowned and looked down at myself. No, the dress was still whole and only the bruise on my thigh showed, nothing to warrant a gasp. "You went out dressed like that?" Alexander said, and he sounded seriously pissed off again, his stormy eyes sparkling dangerously. I met his stare, obviously. "You can't decide what I wear, so stop that." I stood up and kicked off the heels, then made my way over to his closet, deciding that I might as well take some of his clothes to wear to bed after I showered. Brittany. His voice was still tight and controlled, but he stepped up behind me as I rummaged through his clothes, trying to find something suitable to wear to bed. He reached over me and pulled a pair of boxers and a shirt from a shelf and handed them to me. His chest pressed against my back. It made my breath hitch in my throat as I felt how warm he was. Solid and powerful. "Thanks," I said, and tried to slip past him to go to the en-suite bathroom. His arms held me in place. "Brittany, we weren't done talking." I glared at him. "Alexander." But then I caught the look on his face. Anger, concern, and from his eyes reflected this bone-wrenching need to ensure that I was safe. "If you must know, Stephanie and Jennifer picked out the dress. I would never by choice wear something like this." I relented, reaching out to press the palm of my hand against his cheek, my thumb rubbing over the sharp line of his jaw. I could see his shoulders visibly relax, and then he shook his head. "So you let your stepsister and mother dress you, but not me? That's different." "Different, how, a grand croix?" he asked, but I was relieved to note that he wasn't angry any longer. His head tilted a little to the side in amusement and curiosity. Well, for one, if I hadn't put it on, they'd have gotten my dad to punish me, or they might have done something to Andy. Just like that, the moment was shattered. My shoulders slumped as I remembered how I'd left my little brother behind, right in the hands of the people I hated most, with a father that didn't love him and didn't care for him. Alexander pulled me into his arms to hold me close. "Shh, it's okay, Britt. Don't worry, we'll go get him tomorrow." He sounded fierce. The words not just a promise to ease my mind, but a thing he was certain of. How? My dad is his legal guardian. I can't just take him away. They could charge me of kidnapping or something. I knew only too well that my father wouldn't let Andy go with me without a fight. He might tell us all the time how we should be grateful he'd taken us in, but he still wouldn't let us go until he'd made sure he'd gained something from it. I had a lawyer look into it. A gros moquois, Alexander sounded certain. "All we need is for your father to sign the adoption papers." I felt warm inside, that he'd taken the trouble to do that even though he'd never met Andy. Still, I shook my head. "My father will never sign those papers, Alexander, not unless he'll profit from it." I was picked right off the floor and carried towards the bathroom, a smirk on his lips now. "You underestimate me a run. Now shower. Unless you want me to bite you too." With his words, I realized that my shoulder was stained red, where blood had dripped from the puncture wounds. Part of the dress stained a much darker red. "Thank you," I said, hurrying inside and closing the door behind me. I could hear him laugh as I locked the door. Obviously, he thought it funny that I was rushing now. Did he think I was afraid he'd just bite me? He'd already told me he didn't feel the desire to drink my blood, that he found it repulsing to desecrate me in such a way. As I stood under the hot water, it first ran red and then a rust brown before becoming clear again. I hadn't realized how much blood I lost, but as I felt at my neck, I could find no puncture wounds whatsoever. A check in the mirror not much later told me there was nothing to see either, but my side was mottled purple and blue. I counted myself very lucky to have escaped today with so little injuries. The shirt Alexander had given me was a long-sleeved button-up one, immaculately white. The fabric incredibly soft against my skin as I shrugged into it. The thread count surely in the millions. The ends dangled down to mid-thigh, pretty much hiding the dark boxers. I stepped out of the bathroom slowly, a little unsure about revealing the length of my legs. Although of course that dress hadn't done much to cover them either. Alexander was sprawled on the bed, his body covered from the waist down by the duvet, his chest and face thrown in stark contrast by the lamp on the bedside table. It painted his flawless skin golden, even though it was normally more pale. His eyes shone in the light, reflecting it and throwing it back into the room. A smirk on his lips as he watched me approach the bed slowly. He didn't hide how he followed the neckline of the shirt to glance at the little cleavage showing. I had left the top few buttons undone. He lifted his hand and beckoned me to come closer, his other one picking up the book from his lap he'd been reading and depositing it beside the bed. He didn't say a word, but the darkening of his eyes said enough. Shivers shot down my spine as anticipation uncurled in my stomach, heat spreading through my body under his gaze. When I reached the bed, he lifted the duvet and tugged me under it and straight into his arms. his arms then curling protectively around me, as if he planned to shield me from the entire world. We both breathed in and out deeply once, and then I heard him say in amusement, "Yes, we missed each other." He fisted one hand in my hair at the nape of my neck, while his other arm pulled me into his lap, shifting my leg so I was straddling him. That hand on the nape of my neck felt possessive and powerful, and I knew that before he'd been holding back, afraid to show me all of himself. But tonight, I'd seen the powerful side of him. A leader, although that word was much too tame and incomplete. My skin sizzled where it touched his, and I stared up into the stormy gray of his eyes. They now held a tenderness that made my heart clench, that reached to the very core of me to show me how much he truly cared. He ran a single finger across the bare skin of my abdomen, tracing a line of fire that shot sensations right down to the center of my body. My breathing hitched in my throat, but I narrowed my eyes. It was unfair that he could affect me such. "We're not done talking yet," I said, but my voice sounded husky, desire lacing through it and lessening my glare. He smiled, just the barest tug of his lips curving upward, but amusement reflected in those stormy pools. "Then talk, Giramokroi. Why was that vampire so scared of you that he passed out when he heard your name? Who are you really?" The question burned in my mind. I could imagine only a few reasons why Luke had been so terrified. Alexander had to be really powerful, and probably very important, but I'd never hear him mention any other vampires, and he seemed to avoid them as much as possible. Alexander nodded slowly at my question, as if he had expected it, and then he started to glow. Power pulsing underneath his skin, lighting him up from within. His face turning ascetic, the bones tight underneath the faintly golden yet pale skin. Still, he was hauntingly beautiful and masculine in an otherworldly form. Unlike in the restaurant, the power this time didn't bring me to my knees from the sheer intensity. I was of course already seated, straddling his long legs, but it had my skin sizzling and my hair flying backwards in an unseen wind. My heartbeat thumping erratically against my ribcage. More than that, the power seemed to flow right out of his hands through my body, a sensual caress. The arousal coursing through me shocked me, but I couldn't hold back the moan that fell from my lips as that power caressed me in the most intimate of ways. As I explained to you before, the power a vampire holds grows over time if the blueprint is there. Age does not automatically mean power, but heritage can. His voice was still the same as I was used to, but more serious, and there was an echo, a resonance of that power that lit him up like a bonfire. I wanted to speak, ask him another question, but although the power seemed to be receding again, sucked into his skin, till the eerie light had all but disappeared. A last tendril of that power stroked across my body, making my nipples tight with need. He wasn't playing fair. My mother, she was Kaleech. Witch. It was a strictly matriarchal society at the time, still is. But when we were born, one did not teach men about witchcraft. We might know of its existence, but never could we participate. Having recovered from the blast of his sensual caress, I narrowed my eyes at him to tell him I did not like the way he'd teased me. His stormy eyes had lost their solemn look as he'd talked, clearly enjoying the effect of his power on me. "Your witch blood has proven to have given you the blueprint for this power?" "The light?" I asked him. Instead of replying, he gripped my hip with one hand and shifted me, moving my body closer so that our chests pressed together. His other hand let go off my hair to stretch out across the headboard of the bed he was leaning against. "I do not scare you?" Confused, I shook my head. "Why would you? I know you'd never harm me, Alexander." He smiled, a slow, lazy smile this time, but I could see the happiness dancing in his eyes. A touch on my mind to show me he was pleased with my answer. Yes, the witch blood gave Sarah her great telepathic abilities, and would probably have augmented Bob as well had he not been weakened when he created us. Glad? Me? I've been strong from the very first day of my creation. Physically stronger than most newborn vampires. Mental shields in place that granted me immunity to many of the older vampires' abilities. It's why from the very first day of my existence as a vampire, I had to fight to survive. Jealousy and fear of what I'd become as I grew older sparked a mad hunt to end my unnatural life before it could even start properly. He fell quiet, and I saw his eyes turn inward, as he remembered those very first days of his existence. It seemed some of his mental shields were down, or maybe I was just more sensitive to him, but I could feel the fear and the pain, the confusion he'd felt when he had to fight so hard for his survival and that of his siblings. The memories were none pleasant, all dark shadows. A sudden smirk appeared on his face as he said, "Now no one but the strongest would dare lay a finger against me or mine. And you, Brittany, you are mine." I shivered at those words, feeling both a little angry that he would claim such complete possession over me and a hot feminine appreciation for that power. So very masculine and strong, and as I thought about it, I realized I could lay claim on him too. "If I am yours, then you are mine," I told him, glad that although I sounded husky, my voice did not quiver and the words rang clear. Alexander's eyes met mine in a piercing stare, but he nodded, his voice low and rough as he said, "Acknowledged agrément quoi." Before I could say or ask anything else, he pressed his lips against mine. Nothing gentle or soft about his touch now, just pure, unadulterated lust. I let him kiss me with slow, toe-curling preciseness, let his hands caress my hair back from my face, and run across my back all the way down to the bottom of the shirt. I even let him run his hands back up the skin of my back, inside the shirt, my mind slowly turning to mush as pleasure from every touch made my body sing, a humming in my veins that could only lead to more pleasure. It was exactly what I needed to forget all about the pain and rejection I felt over the way my father had tried to sell me. I felt a release of tension as well, and I knew it had everything to do with the fact that we'd been apart for such a long time, against our will. My own hands found their way into his lush, silky hair, running my fingers through the strands. His mouth left mine to follow the curve of my jaw to the sensitive spot below my ear. There, he bit down softly, without fangs. Kissing over the sensual hurt, he whispered, "I would mark you here at Gromokwa, where everyone can see. Always." A blush rose on my cheeks and I pushed against his shoulders to create a little distance, my breath coming in gasps. "And where would you want me to mark you?" I understood why he wanted the mark to be visible. It served as protection against every other supernatural creature out there. "You can mark me anywhere, Britt," a dark, sensual promise held within those words. As if he dared me to explore his body before I decided. Feeling shy under his gaze, I ran my fingers across his chest, feeling the taut muscle. He caught my mouth in another hot kiss, teeth grazing over my lips begging entrance. When I refused, they turned more demanding, and suddenly I was on my back, Alexander hovering over me. A moan escaped my lips as his lower half collided with mine, the act very deliberate, his arousal so obvious. At the moan, he never hesitated to take the opportunity to possess my mouth. His kiss, one of a man who knew the effect he had, taking full advantage. My legs wrapped around him to pull him even closer. The friction against my center caused my spine to arch, pressing my breasts up against his bare chest. My fingers were digging into the sleek muscle of his shoulders as he held himself above me without effort. I wanted more. I wanted to feel all of him against me and fall right off the edge that I seemed balanced on. Skillful fingers teased across my skin and the shirt fell open at the front, revealing my bare chest to his hungry eyes. He broke away from kissing me and openly looked down at me. Then slowly, leisurely, he lifted one large, heavy hand to rub a circle around a nipple. He took his time, trailing his lips down across the newly exposed skin. Wet, open-mouthed kisses. Surprisingly, it didn't hurt. When he touched the bruised skin of my side, I felt only pleasure. I wanted to blush and tell him how I'd never done this before, that he was the first to ever touch me in such a way, but the words passed my lips as a moan, husky and unrecognizable. "Again," demanded Alexander as the sound died and he licked across skin so sensitive that it had me arching off the bed, screaming as I came undone. My vision swam and my breath came in short gasps, my fingers scratching across the skin of his back as I scrambled to hold on. Alexander stilled his movements entirely to stare intently at my face, a soft smile on his sensual lips. His eyes filled with male pride and something tender and filled with love and acceptance. Then he rolled off me, taking my body with him to press me in the crook underneath his arm, my face against his neck. The loss of warmth and friction against the V between my legs made me shiver, but I felt boneless and suddenly very drowsy. One large hand pulled my leg up to entwine with his, and then the duvet slipped over us to shut out the cold of the night. Sleepogram ukroi, he whispered softly, caressing my cheek as he turned off the light, plunging us into darkness. His chest was hot against the bare skin of my breasts, but despite the incredibly pleasant sensation, I felt my mind drifting off. Alexander, what about you? My voice hushed with sleep. A fight to keep my drooping lids open. A dark laugh that shook his body. We have eternity. Brittany, do not worry. Eternity with this man? Alexander Clitton. That didn't sound too bad.